Soldiers survived freezing trenches using this simple heat-saving layer, and the same principle still works inside a living room today. When winter settled into the trenches of the First World War, cold was not a discomfort. It was a weapon. Damp soil, constant wind, and near-permanent moisture stripped heat from the body faster than hunger or exhaustion. Yet soldiers did not rely on advanced technology or complex heating systems to survive. They relied on a simple physical principle that modern homes still forget. Trapped air is warmth, and separation from cold surfaces matters more than thickness. This guide focuses on the exact heat-saving layer used in trenches, how it worked, and how the same method can quietly transform the coldest room in your home without modern upgrades or expensive equipment. The trench insulation layer worked by separating bodies from cold earth, not by producing heat. Trenches were cut into wet ground that conducted cold relentlessly. The first lesson soldiers learned was that standing directly on earth drained warmth continuously. The solution was not thicker boots or more fires, which were impractical and dangerous, but layering material between the body and the ground to trap still air. Straw, wooden duckboards, canvas, sacking, and even compressed paper were laid down to lift soldiers above the cold surface. This layer created a buffer zone where air could remain still, dramatically slowing heat loss. The material itself mattered less than the space it created. This is why even thin layers worked when used correctly. Straw and paper were not primitive choices, they were deliberate insulation materials. Straw was widely used because it was abundant, lightweight, and excellent at trapping air when kept dry. Soldiers slept on it, stood on it, and packed it into walls when possible. Paper, especially newspaper, served a similar function. When layered, crumpled, or folded, paper creates countless tiny air pockets. Letters from the front frequently mention stuffing coats, boots, and sleeping areas with paper as a defense against freezing nights. These were not acts of desperation. They were practical applications of thermal physics long before insulation was industrialized. Moisture control was the difference between warmth and failure. A heat-saving layer only worked when it stayed dry. Wet straw became useless, cold, and heavy. This is why trench systems elevated bedding and flooring above water level using planks or crates. Soldiers rotated materials constantly, drying them when possible. The lesson is clear and often ignored today. Insulation fails when it absorbs moisture. Separation from cold surfaces must also include separation from dampness, or heat loss accelerates. This principle applies directly to homes built on concrete slabs or stone foundations. The living room loses heat the same way a trench did. Concrete floors, external walls, and uninsulated foundations draw warmth outward through direct contact. Sitting in a cold living room often feels worse at floor level because heat is being pulled downward continuously. Modern heating systems attempt to overwhelm this loss rather than interrupt it. Trench methods focused on interruption. The goal was never to heat the space, but to stop heat from escaping the body and shelter in the first place. Floor separation is the most effective trench technique that still works indoors. In trenches, duckboards lifted soldiers above frozen mud. In a living room, the same principle applies when separating feet and furniture from cold flooring. A thick rug alone helps, but layering beneath it multiplies the effect. A folded wool blanket, cardboard sheets, cork tiles, or compressed paper under a rug creates a dead air layer that reduces heat loss dramatically. This is especially effective in older homes with stone or concrete floors where cold radiates upward for hours after sunset. Walls bleed heat quietly and constantly unless layered properly. Trench walls were reinforced with timber, sandbags, and fabric to prevent collapse and to slow heat loss. Sandbags were effective because the fabric trapped air while the fill slowed conduction. In a living room, bare external walls function like exposed trench sides. Hanging heavy fabric, quilts, or layered curtains along external walls reduces radiant heat loss. This is not decoration, you know. It is functional thermal buffering. Tapestries served this role for centuries for a reason. They work. Furniture placement matters more than most people realize. Soldiers avoided sleeping directly against trench walls because cold transferred through contact. In homes, sofas and chairs pushed flush against exterior walls act the same way. Leaving a small air gap allows warmth to circulate and prevents furniture from becoming a cold sink. Even a gap the width of a hand reduces conductive heat loss. This was standard practice in cold barracks and field shelters long before central heating. Window insulation followed the same logic under fire. Glass loses heat rapidly. In wartime shelters, windows were covered with fabric, paper, or wooden shutters whenever possible. In living rooms, layering curtains is far more effective than replacing windows. A thin inner curtain paired with a heavier outer one traps air between layers. This mirrors the trench approach of layered barriers rather than single thick ones. Closing curtains at dusk preserves heat accumulated during the day and reduces nighttime loss significantly. Sleeping arrangements taught lessons still ignored today. Soldiers slept elevated, layered, and enclosed whenever possible. Even minor elevation reduced exposure to cold ground air. In living spaces, floor-level seating really increases cold exposure. Raising seating just a bit, or using insulated footrests, can make a big difference, reducing heat drain through your extremities. Cold feet were a serious medical problem in the trenches for a reason. They're still a primary source of discomfort indoors, since heat escapes downward first. The system worked because it was passive, reliable, and energy-free. Trench insulation didn't rely on fuel, electricity, or maintenance. It just worked all the time. That's why it's still relevant today. In modern homes, passive insulation methods cut down on heating demand, rather than trying to replace heating altogether. If your living room holds on to heat, it just needs less energy to stay comfortable. This isn't just theory, folks. It's the same logic that kept soldiers alive through harsh winters without any modern infrastructure. Applying trench methods today takes discipline, not expense. Layering floors, buffering walls, sealing up drafts, and managing moisture will always do a better job than just cranking up the heat. These methods scale. They work in small apartments, large homes, and off-grid spaces alike. The materials may change, but the principle does not. Air trapped between layers slows heat loss. Separation from cold surfaces preserves warmth. Moisture ruins everything. This knowledge survived war because it works, and it still deserves a place in modern homes. What soldiers learned through necessity remains one of the most effective heat-saving strategies ever used. Not because it was clever, but because it respected how heat actually behaves. If this approach could keep men alive in frozen trenches, it can make a living room more stable, efficient, and comfortable today without modern complexity. If this kind of practical history matters to you, subscribe to Living Through the Seasons. Share this with someone who still thinks warmth only comes from a thermostat, and keep these lessons alive by using them.